Hey everyone, this is part two of a series I'm doing on small stakes cash games based off of some home games I've been playing in Nashville. Since you've already seen part one, or possibly you've seen part one, where we showcased player in the game I've been playing in, who we called Charles, an Iraqi convenience store owner. I'll go ahead and share this picture on this home screen of this video is actually from this game where these three players in this series come from that I've met. Uh, this is actually from the biggest cash game night I ever had playing 1-2. It's kind of a crazy night. I started with 300 and I never had a rebuy, but I ended up making like 31 or 3200 on the night. What actually happened, if you watched part one, you saw that Charles was a pretty crazy player. Uh, and what happened, it was like 6:30. It was like 6 or 6:30 in the morning. We were playing three-handed, and the reason I was still there is because it was so deep, and I felt like I had an edge on these guys. But Charles had about 900 bucks. I had about 1,600, and there's this Asian guy on my right that had around 1,200. He was a good player, a little bit wild, a little bit gambly, but he was kind of tough. He knew what he was doing. Basically, this is the biggest hand I ever played at 1-2. Uh, we were playing 1-2-10 on the button, so the button automatically straddles 10, and it's first to act on the small blind. So we're really deep stacked. I had two red aces in the small blind. Now, the guy on my left, the Iraqi dude Charles, wasn't very prone to like raising pre-flop as much, but I really was kind of thinking it was kind of likely the Asian guy on the button would ISO a lot. So I just called the 10 with aces, and somehow Charles wakes up with a hand and makes it 40 in the big blind. The button calls. I made it 155. Charles called, the button called. The flop came Queen 6-8 with two diamonds. And I checked with the intention of check shoving. And the way this crazy hand went down, I check. Uh, Charles bets. There's about 465 in the pot, I guess. I check. Charles bets 400 with 500 behind. The Asian guy on the button thinks for about 10 seconds and goes all in for 1200. I just snap shipped it all in, like didn't even think about it. Like that was the play. Even though it's kind of scary on that board. Um, Charles tanked for a couple minutes and ended up folding. He ended up, it was Queen 6-8 with two diamonds. He ended up folding like sevens. He like held on to his hand and showed sevens after the hand was over. Um, so once me and the Asian guy got it all in, so there's like 3,400 bucks in the pot. Initially, I was like, well, I always defer to the other person because in these home games, typically for bigger pots, whoever's in the pot once all the money gets in can agree to run it as many times as they want. And I actually like doing that just to spread the variant, just to limit the variance a little bit. So I initially told him, I was like, well, what do you want to do? And he was like, it's up to you. And I just told him, I was like, well, I kind of want to see your hand before. I hadn't turned my hand up either, but I was like, I kind of want to see your hand before we deal it all. And he was like, no, you're not going to see my hand. Um, just decide how many times we're going to run it. And I could tell he's like pissed. And as soon as he said that, like Queen 6-8 with two diamonds, I was a little bit worried that it kind of sucked having to get that much money in if he had like some kind of big combo draw, like 9-10 of diamonds, Jack 9 of diamonds. Like, who knows? Like, just any kind of like flush draw would suck. But when he refused to show it, like, refused to show his hand, it was pretty clear he didn't have a flush draw because if he did, he would have wanted to run it twice. So as soon as he refused to show, I flipped my hand up and I was like, well, I got aces. I guess we'll just run it once. And we ran it one time. The turn and river bricked out and he just mucked. So that was like the biggest pot I've ever won at a 1-2 game. It was like think it was like 3,300 or something like that. Pretty sweet. It was a good night, um, especially for not having to rebuy. But anyway, so part one we talked about Charles. Part two is going to be about a guy we're going to call Keith. This is not a picture of Keith. This is a artist interpretation. This is a picture I pulled from Google that I feel like embodied the spirit of Keith. Keith is a middle-aged grinder slash basketball referee. That's all I know about him. I know he's a grinder because he's always there and he plays late. And I know he's a basketball referee because one of the dealers told me that. I don't know what else he does with his time. He, if anything, I know he's married. He has a couple kids. He's a really nice guy. I like him a lot. But as far as his tendencies, he's a good player. He's a decent player. He plays solid, tight, aggressive poker. Plays fairly conventional. He doesn't get out of line. He doesn't play crazy. If he raises pre-flop and he gets heads up, he's going to c-bet the flop. And if he gets more than one color pre-flop, he's generally only going to bet if he has something. What I've kind of noticed with him is if he raises pre-flop and gets two or more callers, if he doesn't have a pair, he checks 100% of the time. He never like raises pre-flop, and even on like a 2-2-6 flop, if he gets two or more callers, he's never going to stab at it with king queen. I mean, if it's a multi-way pot, he plays really straightforward and kind of face up. He's positionally aware. He plays tight in early position. He plays wide, opens a lot of hands in late position. For short-handed, he plays, a larger amount of hands. He's pretty aware of how to play solid poker. Another significant thing I've noticed about him, which is going to come into play in one of the few hands we see in just a minute, is that he always bets if he has a strong made hand or a hand with a lot of equity, like a big draw or something. He is always betting. He never checks a made. He never mixes it up and tries to confuse anybody. If he has a big hand or he has a hand that has a big draw, he's gonna bet it every time. He never slow plays big hands. He never just plays hands differently just to confuse people. He either has a big hand and bets it, or he doesn't have much and he checks it. It's pretty straightforward. It's kind of transparent the way he plays. Like I've played with him a lot now, and I've really gotten a good feel of how he plays. And I think I've gotten pretty good at finding ways to take pots from him. But he doesn't like trap you. There's just a lot of things he does. Like it's just very straightforward. If he's betting big, he doesn't make big bluffs. If he's betting big, he's gonna have it just about every time. Um, he even rarely like well, let's say he has aces on like a really dry board and he bets and gets called. Um, he's never checking, even if it's like the safest turn ever. He's never gonna check, hoping to get another bet so he can check raise. He is always betting. So you pretty much know when he double barrels, and it's this, and if he's putting $100 in the pot, he's got a hand for the most part. He knows when to make the right call downs, but he really does not like making hero calls, which factors into one of the hands we're going to show in a minute. Um, Another thing I've noticed is like if he raises king queen and the flop has a king or queen on it and he has top pair, he really kind of falls in love with that, and it's almost like he just thinks it's the nuts. And it is a lot of the time, but like if he has king queen on a king high board and he didn't get re-raised pre-flop, it's pretty tough to convince him that his hand isn't good. And for that reason, I play a lot of pots with him for several reasons. I play pots with him because he can't fold. He has a hard time letting go of top pair, good kicker. I play a lot of pots with him because there are lots of ways to bluff him when there are, tricky board developments or the board changes a lot on the turn in river. He'll often fold. He doesn't like to make hero calls, so there's a lot of opportunities to bluff him. Um, and on top of that, like I said, he doesn't double barrel with nothing. Um, I float him a lot when he c bets, just because I know, a huge majority of the time he's going to give up on the turn, and I can just c bet with impunity and take the pot down. But the one thing I have noticed about Keefe more than anything else is that Keefe does not like to lose money. He doesn't get tilted per se, but he gets tilted. He does not like getting coolered. And even more than that, I think the thing that disgusts him most that he avoids at all costs, like getting coolered, you can't do anything about. But calling off when you're not good and you don't have a huge hand is a spot he really likes to avoid. He does not like making hero calls and does not like investing significant amounts of money unless he knows he's probably often going to win the pot. One other thing I've noticed, generally around 2 or 3 in the morning, Keith's wife starts blowing him up on his phone. And around the time that happens, typically Keith starts playing a shitload of hands and he is seeing every flop and he's out the door within 1 hour. But that's just one thing I've noticed because when that starts happening, I start three betting him a lot. Um, but anyway, uh, we'll go ahead and start hands with Keith. I think we just got like 2 or 3 of them. This first hand, we have Ace King on the button. This was a straddled pot. Like I said in part one, I can't. This replayer doesn't allow for you to post straddles or show that there was a straddle. So I automatically posted 10 before my hand was dealt here. Keith opens to 30 under the gun. Like I said, he's straightforward. He doesn't raise dumb hands from early position. When he makes it 30 under the gun, he has a good hand, and for that reason, um, this isn't really a spot. It's completely okay to three bet him here with Ace King, but uh, us being like 300 big blinds deep, I kind of felt like, especially for two reasons. One, I think he expects me to always three bet Ace King here if I straddled and he opens. And the second reason, he just gets married to top pair. Like if he has King Queen here and there's a king on the flop, he's going to lose a lot of money to me. And the third thing is he's a decent player. Like even though he opens pretty big here to 30, if I three bet pre-flop, he's going to fold ace jack just about every time. Like I said, he avoids marginal spots. He's not going to be calling a three bet very often right here. Maybe he is sometimes. Depends what time of the night it is. Depends if he's stuck or not. What kind of mood he's in. But he's a solid player. He's going to have a good hand here a lot of the time. I'd much rather just flat here, see what happens in the hand, and hope to hit an ace or king. Instead of just, bloating the pot, not getting much action if he doesn't have anything. Um, like if I just flat, my hand's so disguised. Like he's going to lose a lot of money if he hits top pair, if we each hit top pair. So I just decide to flat the 30. These other two guys fold. And the flop comes 7, 8, 9. Something really interesting happens. I already said, like, Keith doesn't, he c-bets all the time. But like I said, he c-bets like normal boards, just average boards. He's going to c-bet because he's a pre-flop raiser. When the board's really ugly, he's only c-betting if he has decent equity in the hand, or that's about it. I mean, if he either has a big hand or he has a lot of equity, but on this kind of board, for him to be the pre-flop raiser and check, these are the things that I deduced as soon as he checked. He does not have a club. It's very unlikely he has a 10. He definitely doesn't have a set. He definitely doesn't have a straight. So pretty much, there are so few hands he could have here that I assumed when I c-bet he was going to fold like 90% of the time. I bet 40 and a 60 and he called, which is a little bit bizarre because for him, just the way he plays, for him to check that flop there really are not very many hands at all that he can have. Like, he either has a humongous hand here, or he has a very extremely mediocre, vulnerable hand that probably is going to turn into a pile of dog crap by the river. So I bet the flop, but let's think of what those actual hands can be. He could have flopped a flush, but if he didn't, really the best hand I can think he could possibly have. I think if he had a nine, he would bet. So I really just kind of feel like the best hand he can have here is like ace eight suited or ace seven suited or just something like that. It's just very, unless he has a flush, it's just very difficult for him to have anything except a very extremely mediocre hand that's going to become even uglier when a club or a straight hits on the Turner River. So he called the 40, kind of bizarre. I still think even if he has a flush, he's going to bet a lot. So I really kind of feel like here he has just an extremely mediocre hand. It wasn't that I was hoping like a club or a straight card hit on the turn because I think he's going to fold a huge majority of the time because if he had a club draw or a straight draw, I think he would have bet the flop. But this was just a complete brick and is pretty much the only kind of turn I was hoping not to see. Uh, but it still doesn't change anything. I still think he just has a really mediocre hand. I'm probably giving up on Brick Rivers because I know he's not calling 40 with nothing. And if he had he's not calling with a draw either because if he had a draw he could call 40 with, he would have bet 40 with it. So I pretty much know he has a pair here. It could be a really crappy pair like fives, sixes. Even if he had I think if he had any club, he would have bet. So I just feel like he has ace seven, ace eight, five, sixes, something like that. And basically, my plan here on the hand is if the river is a complete brick, I'm just giving up. But if any draw completes, I was planning on betting the river. And fortunately, a club hit on the river, which is pretty much the best card I could hope for because that's like it's possible he could have some weird kind of straight draw, like 6-7. So like if a straight hit, he could possibly have a piece of it. But a club hitting was like really the ideal card because I really one thing I know for sure about how Keefe plays is if he had a 10 and had an open ender, he would bet it. And if he had a jack of clubs or higher, he definitely would be c betting the flop. So I pretty much knew the best possible hand he could have here was like twos through sixes with a club, like some real crappy club. And even then, I don't, like I've said several times, Keefe does not like to put money in the pot, put large amounts of money in the pot without knowing he's probably good. It's completely reasonable for me to have a good club here very often. Um, and the bottom line is, if he doesn't have a club, he's folding. And I know he can't have a good club. Even if he has a crappy club, he's folding a lot. So this was pretty much like this was a really standard easy bet. Giving up on that river would be a pretty atrocious play, I think, just because if with the reads we have on Keefe, it is not possible for him to have a hand that he's going to call 125 with. So that ace king hand is kind of weird how that hand went down for us to win with ace high on that river. Uh, but play the player, I guess. I don't know. Next pot. Ace jack on the button. Several limpers. This was not a straddled pot. We just make it 15. Pretty nice spot here. We're on position. We're in position versus everyone. We got a good hand. It's very unlikely anyone has us beat pre-flop. Flop comes 3-3-8. That's actually a good flop for a hand. This is about the best flop you can get without, flopping an ace or a jack. Uh, it's unlikely Keefe isn't calling unless he has ace three suited. He's not calling with a three out of position. So the best hand either of these guys can have is pretty much like a pair of eights. But it's even on, like, if they don't have a pair of eights, like, they're just going to fold most of the time. So we just make a pretty standard 3 bet, or pretty standard C bet to 25 here. Keith calls. Now, what is important right here is to consider what Keith has. This is kind of a gross spot for him, um, because I am a decent hand reader. It doesn't take a genius hand reader to know that he has an 8 right here. He has an 8. He either has ace 3 suited or he has an 8 like 100% of the time here. And it's way more likely he has like a suited 8 right here than it is a 3. Uh, so pretty much like it sucks for him because it's pretty tough to play poker out of position versus someone when they know exactly what you have. Uh, he obviously has an 8 here, like 90% of the time. He's not calling with like nothing. Like he has a pair of eights. And what I used to do before, like I think I've improved a lot in cash games in the past couple of years. Uh, I used to always like, oh, the king hit, I can represent that, and then go ahead and like he checks, and then I bet 60. Well, Keith is a decent player too, and he knows you can't just call one bet with the 8 on the flop and then fold because an overcard hit. Keith knows that if you're going to call 25 on the flop, you can't fold on the turn to just a reasonable like half potish size bet. Like he has to call the turn. So given that we know Keith definitely has one pair of eights, unless he has ace 3, and does not like to lose money and does not like to be put in awkward spots. Like I've kind of learned in spots like these, it's just dumb to bet 60 versus someone that you know is calling it. It forces you to. It's either an awful play unless you're going to bet 170 or 160 on the river. Like I don't want to bet 160 on this river. I just want to scoop this 100 in the pot right now and make him fold an 8. Um, so I used to always bet like 50 or 60 here, just trying to rep it and just kind of sighing if he whiffed it, or if he called and I whiffed the river, because I never like to empty the chamber on the river. But why would you bet 60 here when you know he's going to fold to 125? Like maybe 125 is too much. Maybe you can bet like 90. 90 is probably fine too. Um, he's a decent player though. The thing is like overbetting is kind of a sick play where like good players a lot of times, at least at low stakes, maybe he'll hero 90 because he's like, oh, why is he betting so much? But the thing is, when you start overbetting the pot, you kind of like move out of that territory like of why is he betting so much? This looks bluffy. Like at 1-2 no limit, like when you start overbetting the pot, when there's a significant amount in the pot like this, when you start overbetting, you move out of why is he betting so much? This looks bluffy, and you kind of move more into, damn it, that's too much. I can't call that, or I should call that, but I'm not because he might bet the river. It just kind of like I like the overbet in the spot because it gets it over with. It's not like a wasted bet. Like he's going to fold here every time. He's not going to continue with an 8. That's just not how he plays. He doesn't like being put in spots like that, but he knows he has to call 60. So instead of like opening that door for him, I just like to like just just pile 125 in his face. He's just gonna fold every time, and that's what I ended up doing, and he did end up folding. But yeah, that's one kind of thing that's I've kind of realized in the past year. Like I'm always looking for overbet spots. Um, when I have a good hand and I know it's gonna look bluffy because like draws missed, I like overbetting. When I have a made hand, um, versus players that I know are capable of making a hero call. But I also, more so than that, I really like overbetting in spots that, like that spot, just oftentimes get called when what's the point? Like he's calling, it's not going to work. You might as well just make a bet that's just going to scoop the pot right then and there. Now this next hand, Pocket aces. I was not involved in this hand. This pocket aces is actually a buddy of mine. And after this hand went down, I called him the next day to rag on him. Uh, I think he played this hand really poorly. I mean, he didn't do a whole much. He didn't do a whole lot except not fold aces. But I think not folding aces was pretty terrible in this particular spot. Okay, he makes it 15. He gets three callers. Flop is 5, 6, 7. That's not the best flop for aces in a four-way pot, but I would see bet most of the time here. He bets 40. Keefe, our tight guy that doesn't like to lose any money, uh, makes a small check raise to 100 with 285 behind. These two guys fold, and what do we do? Well, this is why I ripped on my friend. Now, if it's some insane psycho dude that like has king eight in his range or like jack eight, okay, yeah, get your aces in pre-flop. But this is Keefe. Uh, his range consists of there's like two chunks. The first chunk is two pair plus all hands two pair or better, which obviously murders our aces. And the other chunk of his range is basically monster combo draws. And when I say monster combo draws, Keefe is not check raising small with queen 10 of hearts here. Like, yeah, he has overcards and a flush draw, but that's not the kind of hand that Keefe is committing 400 bucks with. When he makes it 100, he's going with his hand for sure. He's a tight aggressive player. He's not bluffing 100 on this board. Um, he's not bluffing. He's not check raising just an overcards and flush draw. He has a monster combo draw here at the worst. And when I say monster combo draw, I mean a draw that is flipping with aces, like a pair and a flush draw, a pair and an open ender. You're just if you poker stove that range of 50% hands that beat you and 50% hands that are flipping with you, you're only going to win 25% of the time. So why would you put 300 more bucks in the pot? I mean, that's a very rough way of looking at it, but you are slaughtered by Keefe's range right here. This is, in my opinion, one of the easiest folds in the world versus this particular type of player. Uh, my buddy didn't have it in him, just couldn't fold aces, and I think it was pretty bad. I tried to explain it to him from my perspective the next day. I think he eventually kind of came around to it and realized what I was saying, but yeah, that should be a relatively easy fold versus a tight player like Keefe right there. And this is our last hand right here for Keefe at least. Keefe opens 25. This gimpy dude that is not good at all, and he's really spewy calls. Definitely not folding King 8 suited on the button 700 deep with Keefe. Um, so it's an ugly hand, kind of, that can get you in trouble, but we did flop the nut flush draw, so we got that working for us. Keefe bets 50. Gimp calls. Obviously, we're just going to call here and pray we hit the turn. We don't. Um, so now our hand kind of sucks now because you can't just call another big bet and just try to hit the river. That's not a good play. That's extremely spewy. I'm not gonna, like I said, I never really go into the math. That's not my specialty. But just know that it is very bad to call 135 just to hit a flush on the river and then check fold. Um, and it's also bad just because you can't do anything on the river. It's not like there's a way you can win on the river. It's just going to look like a busted draw if you do anything but check fold the river when you whiff. So Keith bets 135. This other gimpy dude calls. It gets around to us, and initially it's like, I bet 135. But then I thought about it for a minute, and I realized this is a pretty awesome shove spot. Uh, Keith is tight. Keith doesn't like to lose money. He doesn't like to make hero calls. He knows I'm a decent player, and he probably doesn't even think I would ever put 600 bucks in 500 bucks here or like 600 bucks in the pot with king high, like, because that's something he never does. So I don't think he I think he probably, people project their own the way they play onto others that they think are decent too. I don't think he thinks I could possibly ever be doing this with just a king or just a flush draw. But the bottom line is there's almost 375 bucks in the pot, and what does Keith have? Well, when he bets the flop, I don't think, like I said, in multi-way pots he doesn't bluff. So when he bet the flop, I was pretty sure he had a pair of aces. When he bets the turn, nothing really changes. So how do we range Keith? Well, we know that he has ace two through ace king. So let's think of the hands that he is calling with. Since we know he has a pair of aces, what is he calling with? I feel that Keefe is only calling with ace 3, ace 4, and ace 9. I don't think he's calling a $600 shove on this turn with ace king or worse. So he's calling with ace 3, ace 4, ace 9. So that's 3. Now, once again, I'm not going to go into the math of all the combos and stuff, but just a very rough representation of it. Ace 3, ace 4, ace 9. That's 3 kinds of aces he can have. What kinds of aces could he have that are folding? Ace 2, ace 5, ace 6, ace 7, ace 8, ace 10, ace jack, ace queen, ace king. That's 9 kinds of aces. There are 3 times as many kinds of aces that we think he's folding than the ones he has to call with. And on top of that, ace 3, ace 4, and ace 9 are less likely because all those cards are on the board. So it's even more than 3 times as likely. And when you factor in the fact that he made it 25 pre, and he probably has good aces, it becomes even less likely he has ace 3 and ace 4, ace 9. I would think maybe 15% of the time, maybe 20% of the time tops, Keefe is going to call this. I don't think he's ever calling with one pair. I think there's an outside chance he has 2 pair and calls this. But if he doesn't have 2 pair, he's folding, and I win 375. Yeah, if he calls, that really sucks, but at least I have outs. But he's calling so seldom that this is an immensely profitable play if you are reasonably confident he's not capable of calling with one pair. And I pretty much, as soon as he bet 135, I just kind of glanced at the pot, and there's just too much in there. I knew he couldn't call, and so I just went ahead and shipped it in on him. And fortunately for us, he folded. But, the thing is, like, I didn't show it to him, but even if he called, the thing is, I'm really good at hitting flushes on the river. So it was a good fold by him because even if he called, he would have ended up losing more money to a nut flush. So that's part 2. We got one more part here where you guys are going to meet Alvin, and thanks for watching.